I really would like to know what's going on. That's really what's driven me in my research, is to become a physicist. I want to know how the universe works. What is this place? It's a weird place. I forget which physicist said this. The big mystery of the universe is basically, why is there not nothing? That's the big question. Why is there not nothing? That's really a really profound question. The universe is weird. We're weird, and it's amazing how prosaic it becomes to us living here, right? It just kind of becomes normal, and we have this idea that everything's normal. There's nothing normal about this universe. And I think these other weird things are reminders that, look, you live in a weird place.
Welcome to another installment of Behind Greatness by Inspire. It's Luciano here speaking as usual. We have a guest joining us today from Albany, New York. His name is Kevin Knuth. Dr. Kevin Knuth is a professor of physics at the University of Albany, as I mentioned, and is the editor-in-chief of the journal Entropy, MDPI. He received his PhD in physics with a minor in math in 1995, where his research in using, I wanted to practice this word, but I'm going to flub it. Magnetoencephalography. Is that right?
Magnetoencephalography.
You too.
Yeah, you threw me now.
Magnetoencephalography.
Yeah, you have to be able to say that before they'll give you a PhD having studied.
Yeah, there you go. Honorary. To study the nonlinear dynamics of human auditory cortical function was one of the first interdisciplinary biophysics efforts at that university that brought together physics, neuroscience, and the mathematical field of nonlinear dynamics. Kevin is the former NASA research scientist, having worked at NASA Ames Research Center. Is that right? Ames?
Yep.
AMES. In the Intelligence Systems Division, designing machine learning systems for astrophysics, earth science, and climate studies. He has over 30 years' experience in applying Bayesian and maximum entropy methods to the design of machine learning algorithms for data analysis applied to the physical sciences. While at NASA, he developed a model-based super-resolution imaging techniques for generating three-dimensional models of planetary nebula from Hubble Space Telescope imagery. His histogram binning algorithm, also known as the Knuth method, is a standard algorithm in Mathematica. His current research interests include the foundations of physics, interference and inquiry, autonomous robotics, the search for and characterization of extrasolar planets, and unidentified aerial phenomena. He has published over 100 peer-reviewed publications and has been invited to give over 100 presentations in 18 countries. Welcome to the show, Professor Kevin Knuth.
Thank you so much for having me.
That was a pleasure. It was a pleasure. So we've been hearing about you for, maybe I told you this the first time we spoke, for probably a couple of years now. I'm not going to say we're ready to speak to you now, because I don't think I didn't understand anything of what I've just read. So I don't think I'm ready for any of that. But one thing that really raised the eyebrow with us is that you said something in an interview that we listened to. It was probably a couple of years ago, and then you actually repeated those words to me the first time we spoke, and you said, "I'm interested in the weird," and it immediately brought me back to one of our earlier, I'm not sure if I mentioned this, one of our earlier guests. His name is Kid Koala. Eric is his real name. And he's a scratch DJ. And he's actually one of the world's pioneering scratch DJs. And his tagline is, if you go to his website, you'll have it there too. It says, and he says, "Keep it weird, they'll get it later." All right? Unafraid. Unafraid.
I like that a lot. Yeah.
So the second thing you told me, I don't know if you remember.
I don't remember.
Well, I didn't expect you to. Neither did I. That's why I write notes. When you look into the abyss, it looks back.
Yeah, I didn't. That's not from me. I forget who. I don't know who says that initially, but yeah.
But you did feel the need to tell me that. Why?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Why did I feel the need to tell you that? That's a good question. That's a hard question. I don't know. I mean, one of the driving forces in my life has been I've always wanted to understand how the universe works. And I think it was Jeff Kripal who you've had on the show.
Hmm.
In his book The Flip, he mentions correctly that in physics, one of the ways that we study things is we push a system to the extreme, right? You have a super collider where you go to the highest possible energies, and so you aren't looking. We don't spend a lot of time studying the universe in its normal state, right? The normal state's kind of boring and familiar. It's when you push it to an extreme state that you can really get interesting information about what's really going on and how things work. And Jeff Kripal mentions that in his book, and that's absolutely right. That's correct. And in some ways, that's true for the human condition as well. I mean, we like to think of science as being objective, but in reality, everything is subjective. We're all observer participants. And what matters to us is really the subjective part. That's the most important part. What happens to us, is what's important to us about the universe. So it's really when the universe is in a weird state that really captures my attention, because that's when you can really get information about what's really going on. How should you really look at things? And that's really the difference between, classical Newtonian mechanics, where you deal with, balls rolling around, or, blocks sliding down planes, and all of that, and quantum mechanics. And quantum mechanics is when it gets weird, right? You get to the extremely small things, you push the limits to the extreme, and you find out things don't quite act the same way that you thought they did when you looked at big things.
It's interesting. You just said that it's interesting when things get into a weird state. Growing up as a kid, let's just start as a kid, I saw scientists as people who like weirdo things, that investigated weirdo things. And that's, I'm obviously not laying judgment. That was just my impression. Is that, very simplistic question, is that the case?
I think in a lot of ways, I think that's the case. Yeah. I mean, I certainly was inspired by space and things happening in space. And space is a weird state. It's very different than what you see here on Earth. And in fact, the things that really tend to grab people's imagination, in physics especially, are things like quantum mechanics or black holes. I mean, black holes are weird. Gravity is extremely strong. And it's so strong we don't have a theory for how gravity behaves at those strengths at small scales, right? We don't have a theory of quantum gravity. So to understand that, you have to be able to look at the universe in that state and to try to figure out how does this actually work? How does gravity work? We have an idea of how gravity works here, on Earth, when you're dealing with relatively, I guess I'll say, medium-scaled objects and low amounts of gravity. But it's not until you push the limits that you realize, well, we kind of understand how gravity works, but we don't quite understand it, because when we get to this limit, things don't make sense to us. We can't really come up with a theory of how to explain it.
What is your marker for the level of discomfort? Where is it that you start getting uncomfortable as a scientist?
Uncomfortable in what sense? Like public speaking? No, I'm joking.
I know I gave you zero context.
I worried about that at one point. So
I gave you zero context, because I want to go back to the weirdo, the outliers. Like we had your colleague Gary Nolan on the show a couple of times,
right.
And we talked about the outliers, and how scientists should investigate what is outside the data set, because that's where it gets interesting. So for what we've learned is that some scientists, and again, I don't mean just scientists, like even people in business, people that run their own businesses. Sometimes the successful ones are the ones that see the outliers and see the opportunity, and then sometimes those are the ones that sometimes the outliers are too shiny of an object that distract you from what the goal is. In your sense, in your world, maybe the outliers, and I'm making assumptions here. My question's coming. Are scary or make some scientists uncomfortable. And obviously, for scientists like Gary Nolan and yourself, that's not the case. Do you have an outer sphere of your exploration? How about that? Maybe that's better.
I see where you're going with this. Yeah. No, I don't think I found my limit yet. So maybe that's the most scary fact.
Is it scary?
Well, no, I don't think so, really. But not knowing exactly what types of weird you might encounter, it's a little intimidating, right? So
Sure. Intimidating. Oh, okay.
so that may be a better word than scary, I think.
So intimidating to what you've learned to date, intimidating to your own person, to your own safety, intimidating how?
Yeah, and intimidating to your worldview. And when something is impinging on your worldview and you're interested in studying it, that makes it very hard for you to do so, because it's going to when you consider my worldview, it's going to definitely, in my not being as intimidated, it's going to definitely intimidate some of my colleagues and make it very hard to seriously study such things.
I started to listen to one of your talks in the Soul Foundation. Maybe we'll talk about that too in this episode. And at the beginning of the talk, you mentioned or you spoke a few minutes about skepticism and what you thought about skepticism and how skepticism is used depending on what your worldview is. And
Right.
So you mentioned engineering. So you waved the cell phone and you said, this is not physics. This is a feat of engineering. So I'm gonna quote you here because I want you to elaborate. You said engineering is the act of using physics to finding workarounds to problems. And unfamiliar engineering can look a whole lot like anomalous physics. Elaborate, please. I think I know what that means, but I am not making assumptions.
Yeah, engineering. When you're engineering something, you're designing something to solve a particular problem, right? You're trying to usually do something difficult, and it's difficult because it's not normal, right? So you're doing something that's not a normal thing. So you go get in a car, you drive at 50 miles an hour. That's not you're not You don't normally travel at 50 miles an hour. You usually walk, and that's 5 miles an hour. You get in a jet plane and that's 100 times faster, 500 miles an hour. And in that case, you have to engineer some solutions, because you can't barrel through the atmosphere at 500 miles an hour at 40,000 feet without consequences, right? And so you've got to come up with workarounds for these consequences. And so, and of course, supersonic flight was one of these barriers, So on how you have to engineer something to be able to handle supersonic flight. And I've been studying UAPs, and that my talk at Seoul was on UAPs. So UAPs, we observe them accelerating at accelerations about 5,000 times, at least 5,000 times the acceleration of gravity. I mean, there are actually some estimates up to 10,000 times the acceleration of gravity. I don't know how you do something like that, and physics-wise, it feels impossible. But there was a time when people looked at supersonic flight and said, "Well, this is impossible. You can't go faster than the speed of sound, or you can't travel to the moon. That's not going to work." So there's a lot of things that we tend to feel are impossible not because the physics won't let you do it, but because you don't know how to engineer such a solution. And when those solutions are engineered, it can look like magic. It can look very different than, it's certainly not the object's not in what you would consider a normal state, right? It's not the normal, boring state of things. So, and it can be very difficult to imagine how it works. I mean, a cell phone is, if you were to give a cell phone to, somebody from the Roman times, it would be a magical box
Sure.
with lights on it. They would, and that would be very strange. But even if you gave it to somebody like Michael Faraday, who, or James Clerk Maxwell, who developed Maxwell's equations to understand electromagnetism, they would have a hard time understanding how a cell phone worked too. And it could very well still look like magic to them. And so I think that's what I was pointing to. And it was, was it Arthur C. Clarke? I'm going to mix up which person said that, but said that a sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And I think that's really what he was getting to as well.
What seems to be magical to you?
Certainly accelerating at 10,000 Gs, barreling through the atmosphere at 40,000 miles an hour without a sonic boom. That seems like magic to me.
Sure.
I don't know how to explain that. So this is a common discussion we have when we're studying these with the colleagues that are willing to study it. How could you do that? How can we explain that? Can we explain this with advanced engineering, or are we going to have to start talking about new laws of physics? And I think that there's reasonably a reluctance to jump to the conclusion that you are going to require new laws of physics. There are reasons why we have the laws of physics that we have, and some of those, if you're going to just run to a new set of laws, you have to have some rationale for that, and so that's a very difficult thing to do. And it's much easier to appreciate the fact that you probably just can't grok that engineering, rather than there actually being new laws of physics. So.
In the first conversation we had, I don't know if it was part of your dissertation or just this is where it was just in my notes, like under the word dissertation, that you believed or believe that reptiles and fish are more telepathic than other beings. Did I write that right?
Oh, that's not in my dissertation. That would be, okay, so that's complicated and a little long too.
Both don't scare me. Complicated and long.
Yeah. So I was recently introduced to a podcast called the Telepathy Tapes.
Mm-hmm. Know it well.
In which they introduce autistic individuals who are nonverbal. So they're not able to easily speak. They can do typing or pointing at numbers and letters and things like that, but they're typically nonverbal autistic subjects. And in the podcast, they discuss about how there is evidence that they are actually telepathic. Let's see. Well, recently I've not listened to the whole podcast yet, but I'm up to a point where they were talking about dogs who know when their owners are coming home,
right?
Which many of us have actually seen happen, and they talked about a parrot that is an African gray parrot that named Nikesi, who has a very large vocabulary, probably one of the largest vocabularies of a parrot ever recorded. And so it can speak in complete sentences. And they've done tests with that parrot, but that parrot can know what his owner is looking at and can comment on those objects. And so in the podcast, actually, they had the parrot on another floor of a building. I think they live in New York City. And another room totally, and were recording the parrot as they were recording the parrot's owner, and she was being shown pictures. There were pictures in an envelope. She would open up the envelope and look at the picture, And then they would record what the parrot say, and the parrot would very often comment on the picture, which was very, very surprising. And I know in one case there was a picture of a man talking to a taxi driver, and the taxi driver had their head out the window. And when, she focused on the taxi driver's face, the parrot goes, "Be careful, don't stick your head out the window." I mean, it's like, wait a minute. The parrot isn't just going to say that randomly in a room by itself.
Yeah.
So this is odd. I mean, this is the weird that captures your attention. You're like, wait a minute, this shouldn't be happening, but it apparently is. And so, so I have, some familiarity with autism, having, done some neuroscience work in my PhD. That wasn't the topic of my dissertation, but I then later worked as a postdoc, worked in the neuroscience department at Albert Einstein College of Medicine, and my advisor was friends with Oliver Sacks. So I got to meet Oliver Sacks several times and talk about neuroscience with him. And just coincidentally, my Dr. Daryl Treffert is a neuroscientist, or maybe neurologist in Wisconsin, and he was the scientific advisor for the movie Rain Man, but he studied savantism, right, in autistic subjects.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know him. I knew his son Jay. His son Jay had a locker next to mine in high school. And so we have a weird coincidence. And my father worked with autistic adults at one point, so I got to know several of these people. And it's interesting because savantism is something that is widely accepted as being real, right? But we don't have a theory for how it works. Somehow people who hear a piece of music can just sit down and play it right on piano when they've not been really taught how to play piano or music. So where is that information coming from? Where do those skills come from? I think people very often flippantly say, well, these are latent skills, latent skills you're an animal, latent skills to play a piano. How did that evolve? Right. How did that happen? Savantism is a great example of the universe, in a weird state, right? Where this doesn't seem to make sense. You've got a person who we typically think is severely disabled. They usually lack fine motor skills, and yet can do all of these things. The calendar computing, so be able to tell you what day of the week you were born on, or something like this, and they can do this very quickly. But these are latent math skills. Well, mathematics also didn't evolve in animals, so how are they latent?
Sure.
We've only had really been using mathematics for 2,000, maybe 5,000 years if you really want to push it, but that's it, as far as we know. So these skills aren't evolving in people. So those very flippant explanations aren't really explanations. These are made up stories to try to make you feel better about the weirdness, I think. And so it was interesting to me, knowing about savantism, to hear the claim that some of these people might be telepathic, and then so I found that very interesting. And I know from some of the work from Gary Nolan, who you've already mentioned, who found that in people with very strong abilities in intuition have a brain, I guess I'll use the word abnormality, where their caudate putamen has very dense connections to cortex. So the caudate putamen is part of the midbrain. And then just knowing the idea that, people who claim to be able to do things like, ESP or whatever, sometimes meditations, they claim that meditation seems to help. Well, meditation very often calms down cortical activity. So and some of these abilities also appear, savantism and these other phenomena also appear in people who've been brain damaged, which
Mm-hmm.
typically brain damage is going to happen to cortical regions. So, you might be able to form some kind of picture that, well, maybe, what if these weird abilities are all midbrain abilities and the cortical, humans really depend on their cortical activity. The cortex pretty much drowns out the midbrain, unless you meditate or unless you've been brain damaged, or something like that. And so listening to this, I thought maybe these things are normal, and some of the like the telepathy is evolved, but it's a midbrain activity, so we can't really access it usually. And then I thought, well, then you would expect animals without cortices to probably have these abilities. So those would be, reptiles, fish, parrots. And
Yeah, sure.
reptiles and fish can't communicate with us very well, so you can't easily do experiments with them. But but parrots you can.
They
So
can hail a
that's
cat.
exactly.
Hmm.
Yeah, so that's interesting.
Hmm.
Yeah.
We've had Rudy Shield on here several times, astrophysicist. You know of him,
Oh,
obviously.
right.
And he's talked to us about his thoughts on black holes, or what we believe as black holes, as nature's hard drive. Is that for those of us who have these heightened abilities, can access that hard drive. There's a thinner layer between us, our physical beings, and that hard drive, and they can access it much easier than the rest of us, including those who have been, quote unquote, damaged, those of us who seem to be savants, or those of us who have had exposure to UAP or UFO activity. That's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. We had him on an episode with Gary Nolan too, so they had a discussion back and forth. We were
Oh,
just
that's
we were just
interesting.
listening and watching.
I'll have to watch that. I'm not familiar with that, so that would be
Yeah,
interesting to hear at least.
right. Talk about exploring things on the outer sphere is phenomenal. So this is let's go. I, and I laugh here not because I find this amusing. I laugh here because it's exciting. You had an experience that I know you're willing to share. Hopefully, willing to share when you were a young father to your little boy. You want to share that with the audience?
Yeah, that was a difficult experience, and it helped me appreciate a lot of other things, which will become more obvious when I tell the story. My son was about a year and 3/4 senior, so he's a year and 9 months, and he was able to get out of bed and that. So we had a gate, in front of his bedroom door. His crib was lowered. The side was taken off so he could get in and out of bed himself. But we had a gate in front of his door so that we lived in an upstairs apartment so that he wouldn't escape his room and fall down the stairs or something
Mm-hmm.
horrible in the middle of the night, right?
Been there.
And so I was going to bed one night, and I'll give you all the caveats that were running through my head at the time or later. It was 2 a.m. I was tired. I'm going from a brightly lit living room to a dark hallway. And as I'm walking down the hallway, approaching, his bedroom was so we had a hallway. At the end of the hallway was the bathroom, and on either side of the bathroom were two bedrooms. So his bedroom was on the left side, and my his parents' bedroom was on the right side. And so I'm approaching the bathroom to, brush my teeth before I go to bed. And as I'm coming up on his room, I see a boy standing at the gate. And my son would sometimes do this. So I thought at first it was him, but I was puzzled because he looked bigger. My son's only a year and a half, so he holds the gate like this, right? But this
Mm-hmm.
boy was holding it down here. And as I get closer, he looks like he's about 5 years old, and I'm like, well, this isn't right. What's happening? So I said his name. I said, Henry, is that you? And didn't answer, and I walked closer, a little confused and starting to feel a little spooked. You know, that uncanny valley feeling where something's wrong here, and it shouldn't be, right? And you know, the hallway is a typical hallway in a house. I mean, it's what, 4 feet across. So I got to within 5 feet of him easily, and could see him well enough. There was light coming down the hallway from the living room and he was properly lit. I was like, this isn't my son. This is a 5-year-old boy, and he's holding the gate, and so I'm just confused. I'm like, what's going on here? This isn't my son. And then but I was worried. So I remember I had my arms crossed and I had my back up against the wall, and I said, Henry, is that you? And I'm thinking, I'm just confused here. Something's wrong, and I don't. Why is this not working? And Henry, is that you? What's wrong? Is that you, Henry? And then the boy looks at me, and he looked scared. His eyes were big, and he looked scared. And I think that scared me. The fact that he looked scared me. And he very, very delicately let go of the gate. He didn't just quick let go. He very slowly lifted his fingers up like this, and his eyes were big, and he was staring at me. And then he just held his hands steady, and he backed into the room with his hands up like this, which was kind of an abnormal movement. I mean, thinking about it now, when I reflect on it, thinking that, you know, he did look scared. So if he was scared, he's maybe trying not to make any more movements than he had to get away from me. And he backs into the room, into the shadows in the room. And I'm just like, that's not my son. That's somebody else. And then the parent kicks in, right? There is a stranger in my son's room. And all the fear is gone. I ran at the door. I jumped over that gate and ready to grab this kid. And I land in the room, and I look, and there's no one in there. And I'm just like, what the heck is going on? And so I search the room. I check on my son. You know, he's asleep in bed. He's fine. I'm looking around the room. I look everywhere. I look under his bed. I'm looking in the closet. I'm looking on the top of the dresser, everything, just because I'm like, there was a kid here a minute ago. I was 4 feet away from him. It was, very clear. And then I was like, well, there's no one in here now. My son's fine. It is 2 a.m. You are clearly hallucinating. You need to get yourself to bed is what needs to happen, right?
Was your son asleep?
He was asleep, yeah. So I checked on him, made sure he was covered nicely. He was asleep. He was fine. And so I left the room, stepped over the gate, and went right next door to the bathroom to start brushing my teeth. And I'm just telling myself, I'm like, clearly you're hallucinating. That was not your son. There's nobody there. Stop worrying about it. And I'm brushing my teeth, and I'm almost done brushing my teeth, and all of a sudden I hear my son shout, "Mommy, Daddy, help, help." And I just ran from the bathroom right next door, jumped over the gate again, and went up to his bed. And I said, "Henry, what's wrong?" And he says, "There's someone in my room." And I was like, "Oh, no, 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 this is not cool." And then I thought, well, wait a minute. I was just here. Then there was no one in the room, and he probably is now waking up with the realization that, I was in the room, but he didn't know that it was me, right? So I told him, I said, "No, Henry, that was me. I was here just a minute ago, just checking on you, and you were fine." And he goes, "No, Daddy, it wasn't you. There's a boy in my room." And I was like, "Oh, no, 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 you can't say things like that. That's not cool." That is not cool, man. Because
Daddy's not going to sleep.
I just convinced myself that I was hallucinating, and I was like, "There's a boy in your room?" And he goes, "Yeah, there's a boy in my room." And I said, "Did he hurt you?" He goes, "No." And I said, what was he doing?" He goes, "Standing. He's just standing." And I said, where was he standing? He was by the door, which is where I saw him standing.
Mm-hmm.
But, oh, this is not cool. And I said, well, what happened to him? Where'd he go? He goes, I don't know where he went. He was there and then he wasn't there. And I was like, oh, no, 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 no. This can't be happening. And you're the parent. You've got to you got to keep the kid calm, right?
Yeah, for sure. He's looking at you for
He's still
guidance.
teary-eyed and upset. I couldn't quite understand why he was so scared. And I asked about that, and he didn't really reply. He's 1.5, so you're not going to get a whole. He's not going to give you his evaluation of his psyche. So I asked him, though. I said, "Well, all right. Do you want me to sleep in here with you tonight?" And he said, "Yes, please." And so we had an air mattress in our little storage room down the hall where and it was inflated, just stuck in there, inflated in case he needed us to sleep in there with him. So I just went and grabbed that and laid it down next to his crib. And I laid down next to him, and he's laying down, I'm laying down, I'm rubbing his back, and he's getting all drowsy-eyed, and everything's fine.
Did you sleep?
And, well, we're not done. So he's getting all drowsy-eyed, and then all of a sudden his brow furrows a little bit, and his eyes get really big. He goes, "There he is, Daddy. He's right behind you." And I rolled over, and there's nobody there. I rolled over, and I rolled back, and I said, "Henry, I don't see anybody." And he said, "I don't know, Daddy. He was there, and then he wasn't there." I said, "That's it. We're out of here. I'm done." I'm done. I grabbed him, and we went next door to our bedroom. My wife's asleep, and I put him in bed with us, and my wife said, "Why are you bringing Henry in here?" He goes, "Henry's sleeping with us tonight. I don't want to talk about it till the morning." and I closed the door, hoping that somehow keeps the boy out of my room, and tried to go to sleep, and eventually did. But
did he ever come back?
In the morning, of course, my wife questions Henry about it, and he confirms, "Yeah, there was a boy in my room, and Dad came in," and he confirms the whole story. Yes, so it was
wow.
And for me, it was very upsetting because it was independent confirmation from somebody who's not going to lie, somebody who's not couldn't possibly have made this up.
Mm-hmm.
It was just clear. It was, and I worked hard to convince myself that I was hallucinating, right? And then I have all of this independent verification that, well, wait, no, you're not hallucinating. There's a boy that appeared in his room 3 times in a 10-minute period. And then the being a parent is kicking in, where you realize, wait a minute. How do I keep my kids safe if somebody can just appear in his room at any minute? And I did not sleep for years. I mean, I still don't have good sleeping habits. You'll still get emails from me at 4 a.m. because I prefer to stay up and keep watch. It just is, I stay up, check on people, make sure everything's okay. And because I know that, from experience, I know that somebody can just appear in the house and, at a moment's notice. And that's a very disturbing problem to have, because you can't go to anyone and talk. I mean, the old joke is, who are you going to call?
Right.
And so, I can't go to anybody for help. What do you do? Call the police? Yeah, there was a boy appeared in my son's room 3 times tonight. What are the police going to do? Park a car outside? I mean, there's nothing you can do. And at one level, I know this is real because it happened.
Mm-hmm.
Do I have an explanation of it? I have zero explanation. I have no idea what happened. I don't know who the boy was. Is he a ghost? I don't know. I don't know what a ghost is. And I don't, physicist, I don't believe in ghosts. So, I mean, did
that change your beliefs?
I don't know.
Yeah, right. Okay, right. So
so what it did is, it's kind of a wake up call. As Jeff Kripal would call it, it's the flip. where
Hmm.
I was flipped, where I realized, wait a minute, all is not normal. The universe has some strange things to it that aren't common, but they're not that rare either. And I think the bigger problem is that most of us don't pay attention to them. Had Henry not woken up, I would have gone to bed thinking it was a hallucination, and that would have been the end of the story. And I would have forgotten about it a week later, and all done, right? So it would have just gone away. And how many times does that happen to people where they convince themselves they were hallucinating, and what if they weren't? Um,
Well, I mean, that's
Nobody
it.
wants to go back and revisit that because it's kind of traumatic.
Well,
If it,
I think that's where our knowledge base societally suffers. Because yes, it's most people don't pay attention to it. Most
right.
people, like me, like you in this example, try to explain it away in real
Just
time.
blow it
So that,
off. Blow it
yeah, yeah.
off is, I don't know what that was. I mean, you in the extreme cases, you just go, I don't know what that was. Just, and you forget about it, right? You just try to forget about it. But
But it does make sense too, because you're trying to maintain safety in your sphere. So if you explain it away, it's easier for you to manage what's around you. So I get it. As a father, I get that too. I probably would have done the same. But then the third thing is, most of us remember something in our life that we can't explain, but don't share it.
yeah,
So we live our
yeah,
lives not sharing. And so
right.
there's a knowledge database that doesn't exist like it should for scientists to explore.
No, it happens. It happens to people all over the place, and it happens to scientists, and it happens to doctors and
Non-scientists.
lawyers and everybody. Yeah. So what it is, we don't know because it's never really been taken seriously, never really been studied. So it apparently is one of these situations where you've got the universe in an extreme condition, right? and
Right.
and
Right.
and if you did if you were able to study it, you might be able to learn a lot about the universe this way. But
Yeah. It's in the universe in a weird state that you don't understand. Yeah.
it's in a
Yeah.
weird state. Yeah.
So, again, obvious question. Did that particular episode inform how you approach your science from that point? Was there a change in how you approach your science?
Well, it did inform me that I clearly don't know as much about the universe as I thought I did,
Hmm.
because I can't explain that at all. I don't have a single theory as to what happened there. I saw a boy, very clear. I was 4 feet away from him. Had I not been worried and backed up against the wall, I could probably grabbed him.
Sure.
Then I tried to grab him after he backed into the room. Yeah, I was that close to him. It wasn't like, it's not some misty figure up on the top of the stairs and I'm way down here. No, I'm this far from me to my computer away from the kid.
So let's jump a theme for a moment. Kind of. You were at a talk at a conference, and you were thinking about or starting to discuss simulation hypothesis. Do you remember this story?
Oh, that's actually three of my colleagues.
Okay.
Me and my colleagues were at a talk. We're at a conference, and they were discussing the simulation hypothesis. And that's the hypothesis that we live in a simulation.
Hmm.
But I don't like to say that this isn't real, because it still is real. It's just not the whole reality, right? Is what you would be thinking if it was a simulation.
Sure.
So they had, as the story goes, and I won't name them because I don't have permission to name them. So, but as they spent the whole morning discussing simulation theory, and of course the movie The Matrix came up, which is the prototypical simulation theory movie.
Cultural example.
Which, I'm sorry,
A cultural example.
a cultural example of it, yeah.
Yeah.
Which came out about the same time as The 13th Floor, which actually is another movie that is based on simulation theory, right? Which is also it's a good movie, but it didn't compare to The Matrix. The Matrix hit much stronger. So they had spent the whole morning discussing this, and it was time for lunch. And the lunch hall at this conference place is in a different building. So the three of them had left and walked to the lunch hall. And they opened the door and were about to go in, and there's a water fountain nearby the entrance. And as they walk in, Lawrence Fishburne is at the water fountain. And of course, Lawrence Fishburne played Morpheus from The Matrix, right? It's like, well, wait a minute. I love that story. That is the craziest synchronicity story I've heard.
And does Lawrence Fishburne know about this story? Does he know that he was part of this story?
I don't know if he probably doesn't. They didn't talk to him as far as I know. So he probably doesn't know about this. He's probably just finding out about it now.
We
blowing it all out of the water and causing all sorts of trouble.
You know, this is the second time I hear this story, obviously. The wow factor has not diminished.
And it's easy to say, oh, that's just a coincidence, but I'm gonna quote Mulder from the X-Files, episode 1, I think it is, X-Files, and it is, he says, if coincidences are just coincidences, then why are they so contrived? I'm like, that is a beautiful quote. It is, he's absolutely right. That's the problem. It's contrived, not just a coincidence. There's something else going on. I don't know what that is either.
Do you want anything? Do you want a particular piece of knowledge from that question? An answer from that question? Like, what is going on? What's the answer?
I would like to know what's going on. I really would like to know what's going on. That's really what's driven me in my research, is to become a physicist. I want to know how the universe works. What is this place? It's a weird place. I forget which physicist said this. The big mystery of the universe is basically, why is there not nothing? That's the big question. Why is there not nothing? That's really a really profound question. The universe is weird. We're weird, and it's amazing how prosaic it becomes to us living here, right? It just kind of becomes normal, and we have this idea that everything's normal. There's nothing normal about this universe. And I think these other weird things are reminders that, look, you live in a weird place.
Maybe we're the abnormalities.
It could very well be. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that little 5-year-old boy was scared stiff by the abnormality that he saw walking down the hallway towards him.
Well, I worry about that. I worry about, when I think back about it, at the time I was scared because I didn't know what was going on, and then when he was scared, it made me even feel more anxious. And but now looking back at it, I worry about him. Who is the boy, and what was he going through? What if it was a real boy, and he was experiencing something? I mean, that would have been terrifying for a kid to experience. So I feel bad about that. And then, of course, you've got the ghost hypothesis, which people, it's not even a hypothesis; it's an idea where ghosts are dead spirits that are whatever wandering. I mean, what a horrible existence for a little boy spirit to be having, right? I mean, I wouldn't want that for eternity. So I pray to God that that's not what happens.
Right. I think I shared this story with you, and I feel compelled to share it again here for the listener. I'm not sure if you'll remember, but we had a drummer on a couple of years ago. His name is Jeremy Taggart. And he was a drummer, the original drummer for a rock group called Our Lady Peace. Very successful band, one of my favorite bands growing up in the 90s. And he described a story where they were in like cottage country north of Toronto, and they were jamming just in this, not in the studio, in one of the guys' homes in cottages, and they were in the studio there. And he says, I was just banging away at the drums, and I just got lost in the movement, and I got lost in the music, and I just kept pounding away and doing his thing. And he says, I'm paraphrasing here because it's been a couple of years since I've heard the story from him, but we have it on the episode, where he left his body. He goes, my body was still drumming, but I floated above the room and I could see everything. And he said, I could see people that didn't physically exist in that room, and I could see them, and it felt like I was in a scene of the 1800s. I think he said 1800s or whatever, is it like a Western scene? And he's seeing all these people in these kinds of costumes, like the costume of the day. And he made eye contact with one of those people. He goes, it was the weirdest thing. That person saw who I was and what I was. And the impression I got when he was giving the story, that person was, that being, whatever it was spooked just like he was spooked at seeing him in that room. It's amazing. It's an amazing story.
Oh, that's a great story.
Yeah. Jeremy Taggart.
And I think I can also answer your question about, how that affected me, because I don't immediately disbelieve these stories anymore. Because I've experienced something weird like that, and I know things like this can happen. So, and somebody having a slightly different story is maybe that's not that weird. Wow, that's an amazing story, though.
Yeah, well, I mean, very, very similar.
Especially if the other person saw him and was spooked, it would be interesting to know. I would love to know what's going on.
I have to re-listen to that. Maybe contact him again. Is this so? Does this experience inform your decision on joining the Soul Foundation?
I think it made a big difference for me when I decided to study UAPs, because it had in some ways softened me up to appreciate the fact that I don't understand as much of the universe as I think I do. So don't just jump to conclusions that this is impossible. I don't know that it's impossible. I'm not sure what is possible at some points, especially after having that experience. And it certainly makes me more sympathetic to the term is experiencers who claim to have encountered aliens or, been taken or abducted and have had experiences like that. I'm very sympathetic to those people because and spent a few minutes talking to them. They're traumatized by it in many ways. And I know that trauma. I having someone appear in your bedroom at night is scary.
That's traumatic.
Yeah. And people who've, so I don't easily disbelieve those stories. I think there's probably some truth to them. And they, if somebody's going to share that with me, they just certainly deserve to be listened to respectfully. So I have some sympathy for that now as well. So that I think that's made a difference as well. And there very well could be something to learn here. I mean, if you just blow these things off and scoff at it, you're not going to learn anything interesting.
Well, I think I've come to learn that people like Brian Graves, Kevin Day, they've both been on this podcast, and they're former military guys, both in the Navy. One was an Air Force, one was a pilot, and the other one worked on the radar machinery on the ships. And they had experiences of seeing these things and seeing them detected on the radar as well. Both of them. After speaking to them, they rely on people like you. So scientists who are curious enough to actually study what these things could be, because they're not able to, but they know it's real because they've experienced it.
Right.
In official capacities.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit more serious of a situation than a boy appearing in my son's doorway.
Yeah, right. Like military official capacities. Maybe what I'd like to do is I'd like to invite you back if you're open to it for maybe
sure.
A
that would be great fun. Yeah, certainly.
Okay. And maybe let's lay a little bit of the foundation of the next conversation just here for the last couple of minutes, because we were talking about remote viewing in one of our chats. You and I, we've had several remote viewers here, high profile remote viewers, ex-military remote viewers. Like Joe McMonagle has been on the podcast a few times, and I didn't know this because you're the one who educated me on it. You said that the guy or one of the guys who wrote the training manual became a center director for NASA, or the NASA center director.
No, yeah, I had gotten there's a CIA training manual on remote viewing that, Hal Puthoff had sent me at one point. But I've seen this online as well, so this is floating around.
Yeah.
It's declassified, but I was surprised at one point to find out that, I was showing one of my students this, and I noted that the author was G. Scott Hubbard, who was NASA Ames Center Director when I worked there. But when he wrote this, he worked for SRI, which is where Hal Puthoff had worked, and that's where they developed a lot of. They first studied some of the remote viewing work.
Amazing. All we need to do is talk to people who are involved, and you can see it's one web, and it's a small web.
It's a small web of people, yeah, and there's other people who know about this, and they know it works.
Well, we've had Russell Targ here, and he was one of the first that educated us on that world, and
I've met him as well. Yeah.
Oh yeah, in that video where I saw you present the Soul Foundation, I think Russell Targ, because I recognized.
He's there. He's like in the front row, or
his white hair. I recognized the back of his head.
Yep. Yeah, that's him. That's really true. Yeah,
he's a fanboy of yours. Yeah, that's hilarious.
Well, I don't know about that, but
that's just me.
He was listening to the talk for sure. But the remote viewing is interesting. I mean, I've played around with it myself, and there are times when it feels like it works. And do I have the statistical proof for that? No, I don't. But I'll use the phrase "seeing is believing." When you visualize it yourself, and then you see the picture you were supposed to be visualizing, you realize, that's the one. That's it. I saw it. So you can actually do that.
I didn't know that you played around it yourself using your words.
I did. I probably didn't tell you that when we
first
talked.
No, you didn't.
I played around with that myself a bit. Yeah.
Well, so let's look at a part 2 where we talk about, we go a little bit further into this, and also the behemoth of the article that you wrote that was accepted by the Physics Journal?
Progress in Aerospace Sciences.
Okay. And the title of this is The New Science of UAPs.
Yep.
Okay. It's awesome.
Long paper on the scientific, basically summarizing what's been done on the scientific study of UAPs.
Fascinating. I showed you before, I have it printed out here. So
that's amazing. It's 168 pages. It's really, if I knew that's how big it was going to be, I wouldn't have taken on the project. But I started working on it and just started exploding. I realized that a lot has been there's been a lot done. And I think that a lot of people don't recognize that. There's some points that paper makes where, we point out first, we start out with sightings in Scandinavia in the 1930s. There's the assumption that it all starts in 1947 with Roswell or Kenneth Arnold, right? And that's not true. It's actually much older. So we touch on that. There's also the assumption that scientists and astronomers never see these things. Totally not true. They've in fact seen them and studied them already. There have been, and so we go into a lot of those details.
Okay, brother, let's do this. You're coming back.
Fun. Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, been lots of fun. I repeat myself because I mean it. And we'll see each other soon.
No, it has been fun. Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.